From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a watch, react, and review for you. Let's see what movie's up next. Let's see. Alright, let's watch Liquid Sky. This is a movie that was released in 1982 starring Anne Carlisle, Paula E. Shepard, and Susan Dukas. Directed by Slava Zuckerman. Let me read you the synopsis first, okay? The synopsis is that invisible, tiny aliens have come to Earth looking for drugs and land on top of an East Village, New York apartment inhabited by a drug dealer, Adrian, and her androgynous bisexual lover, Margaret. By accident, the aliens discover something more appetizing than the drugs, and this causes a string of mysterious deaths using Margaret as a conduit. The strange events are all being observed by a lonely woman in the building across the street and a German scientist who is following the alien. That is pretty exciting and interesting, just hearing the synopsis alone. And to be honest, I've saw this movie a long time ago, maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago. I'm not sure. It's all foggy because I only saw it once. But after getting a message from one of you guys, I decided to take another look at it. And what I remember of it was that it's a visually trippy and psychedelic film, which I absolutely love, but this isn't a movie that I've seen often or that I often refer back to. So I want to take another look at it to see if there's a reason why, or if maybe I see it differently from my current perspective. All right, so let's take a look at Liquid Sky. All right, the first 15 minutes in is very, very colorful and bright and vivacious. We get a visual of a face mask with realistic eyes set into it. So it's the centerpiece of this penthouse apartment, almost solely decorated with neon signs. It's a very creepy visual, but it's also too like artistic and fun. And it's like, oh, if I wanted my apartment to look like an art space, this is how I would have it look. I mean, so it's kind of cool. The music is very, very rudimentary. It's a mix of experimental sounds that rarely even have an actual rhythm. So the music is really definitely part of the film in a very integral way. It's definitely a thing to observe in the film for moments, because there are some high-pitched ambient screeches, and then there's a Baroque style tune that is played on an electric organ that kind of blares throughout this, and it could be conceived as a theme for the film. Like, it's supposed to make you feel uneasy, and there are uneasy things happening in the film. So far I'm loving it. I'm enjoying that particular thing. I know it can be very annoying for a lot of people to hear such a high-pitched sound. I mean, it's, same thing, same emotions that I felt when I heard the high-pitched sound in the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, where, the monolith is kind of making those sounds. It's very abrasive, and it's meant to stir up something inside of you. It feels like and sounds like nails on a chalkboard, Now, back to the story. The aliens are drawn to this mask because that is where Adrian, the drug dealer who lives in the apartment, keeps the drugs that she sells. I believe they're trying to get high, from what for what I know of this movie, is that they're trying to get high off drugs because the drugs has a certain kind of endorphins that they need or want. So along with the funky visuals, we get a very loud and interesting art performance at a nightclub. In fact, I would say that this film is very art performance heavy. Adrian, as well as being a drug dealer, is a spoken word artist. Margaret has a male doppelganger. His name is Jimmy, and he's a model, just like she is. It's very interesting because the two characters are played by the same actress. I think the first time I saw this, I was very fascinated about it all because it's definitely something that stands out in the film, and which I think is both visually fascinating and actually totally cool. It's one of the coolest aspects of the film. The difference between the two characters, besides them being male and female, Margaret is actually kind of a nice girl, a little bit of naive, I guess, or trusting of others. She's kind of into Jimmy, but Jimmy kind of despises her. Jimmy's motivation for doing everything he does is because he's after drugs. And the saddest part is that he has no money to pay for any of them. So he's always scrounging for to get his hands on some drugs. I love it so far. It's still giving, thumbs up from me so far. Also, I wanted to add that Liquid Sky, the title of the film, is really referring to the drug heroin. Now, 1 hour in. Okay, sadly, in the search for drugs, Margaret meets, who is also, we know that Jimmy is a character that is after drugs, but Margaret is also into drugs and after it, her next hit of cocaine. So she meets a dealer and she's like, flirts with him and takes him back to her apartment, and unfortunately he abuses her, and then he takes advantage of her sexually, which is pretty disturbing. And yet it's kind of like, yep, that happened, let's move on to the next scene. So it's very glossed over, and the next scene is really a combination of 3 scenes that are going on at once and are spliced in and edited in. And I kind of enjoyed that a lot. It could be very, very confusing, but I thought it was set up quite nicely for a small but low budget film. It's not a technique that's used typically in a low budget film. So this is high-end filmmaking, and let me just tell you about these 3 scenes because they're good. They're very integral to the plot of the story. So first we have Margaret and Adrian just having lunch together, and Adrian is just really berating her, like talking down to her. But then intersplice, we have this whole thing where Adrian wants to go to Berlin. She's like, always, they love me in Berlin. So I thought that was an interesting character detail. And Adrian herself is a weird character, being a drug dealer, but she's a terrible, terrible human being. Horrible. And then we have Jimmy having lunch with his mother and asking her for money. And of course, she's too smart. She's like, no, not going to give you the money, because she knows that the money is going to be used for drugs. And then we have a German scientist by the name of Johann, who is meeting with an acting professor to tell him about the aliens and ask for his help. And ultimately the professor is like, sorry, can't help you, but I've got to go to a meeting. The professor turns out to be Margaret's ex-boyfriend. And they were, I guess, supposed to get married. I mean, she would have been the kind of woman that he would have married, except for she likes wearing strange clothes. She likes the creative lifestyle. And he wants her to be a housewife and be kind of sort of like a trophy for his lifestyle. And I find it to be very interesting that they had a really interesting back and forth dialogue that's quite deep, and it kind of takes you at a surprise, because you're like, oh, this is gonna be like a trippy movie that's not really of any purpose, and the ideas are all scattered, and then you get like a little nugget that really kind of makes you ponder like deeper thoughts and deeper ideas, like the costumes that we wear in our daily lives. So, her dressing up with paint on her face is no different than someone dressing up in a suit. It's an attire that we wear in order to fit into certain circles in our roles that we play in life. And I thought that was awesome. Like, yes, juicy conversation stuff here. And, well, then we go back to the plot. So that's not the plot. That's just some kind of thing that was in Margaret's head, or a subtext. Subtext is probably the correct term for that narrative. And then we get back into the story where the ex-boyfriend, the professor, takes advantage of her sexually. Suddenly he dies. And then, if you weren't sure what happened there, another guy busts into the apartment a few hours later and then takes advantage of Margaret, and he dies as well. So what it seems like is that the aliens and they were after the endorphins from the drugs that Adrian has, but what they're also consuming endorphins that are released in the brains of the people who have orgasms. And yes, that sounds so crazy, but that's what's happening in this film. So if it's just one of those things. Also, Jimmy's mother happens to live right across the street from Margaret's penthouse, and she teams up with the German scientist who has been tracking the aliens, and they spend much of their time flirting with each other and using a telescope to kind of peep at the penthouse, and even eyewitnesses some of the murders that are happening. But what's even fascinating is that no one calls the cops, and they kind of hint to it in the film. So this is definitely a movie that's putting a big smile on my face. To the end. All right, so Margaret thinks that someone or something is killing these men for her, since she's not killed as well. But what she doesn't understand is that she's not being killed because she's not herself reaching an orgasm, and so because it's not pleasant, these guys are taking advantage of her. So in many ways, she's just so lonely and so abandoned that she just becomes a little delusional about it. And initially we see her starting out as sweet and gullible, but by the end she's cold, calculating, and becomes a premeditated murderer. She wants to be with someone who's like her, who understands her. And that motivates her. And that's one thing I have to say about this film, is that they definitely know how to keep the characters of the film motivated to do things, and you can see why they're motivated to do what they do. There's a lot of competency in this low budget film. There is intense thought behind this. At the very big climax of the film, there's a big photo shoot at the apartment, and all hell breaks loose. I mean, there's drugs, there's sex, and the aliens, they kill Jimmy, they kill Adrian, and it's just a huge menagerie of visuals, like turning the pages like literally turning the pages of a fashion magazine editorial from 1982. You know, a little bit about this film. Russian filmmaker Slava Tsukerman was one of the producers, co-writer, editor, the director, and the composer. The film is an adaptation of an original script titled Sweet 16 by Slava. It was rewritten with his wife Nina Karova, but because of their language barrier, they hired Anne Carlisle to help write the script. Now, being an actress, a performance artist, an acting teacher, an author, and model, she was perfect for the lead. And also playing the dual role of Jimmy and Margaret was not the way it was planned. The actor who was supposed to play the character of Jimmy fell out of the project, so she took over. And I thought it was brilliant. It's one of the key nuggets of this movie that really makes it stand out. And the androgyny, too, is just quite mesmerizing. And one thing that really stands out in the film are the visuals and how bold they are, often mixed with harsh edits and non-congruent scenes. Everything about this film is experimental, and to be very honest, I loved it. This is an art piece, no doubt about it. Very David Bowie, Andy Warhol meets Surratt at the Museum of Modern Art 3 days a week, okay? It's super, super artsy fartsy, but in a way that doesn't feel hoity-toity. There's a lot of atmospheric B-roll footage of lights, strange Dutch angle zooms, flashing lights, and of course, the highlight of the film is New York City. And it feels like a time capsule of what it was like to live there. It's so nice seeing that because I was brought up in New York City in the 1980s, and it really did look like that. And it's so nice seeing the Twin Towers in this movie because I grew up with the Twin Towers and took many trips down there. And, you know, since we lost the Twin Towers, again, it's so nice to see it in a film. And you look, even though the music is weird to a lot of people, I feel, and it's not music I would probably play as sort of a something I would enjoy playing, but you know, it's still unique. And with the strange ending that we got, I really feel as if the story itself is totally solid. Nothing is played for a joke. Everyone is serious about their parts, and the acting is pretty decent. It's just that it's told in a way that's not traditional. It's making a statement about traditions itself. There's a lot of really good dialogue about questioning the status quo, how we dress in costumes for our role in society, and the rejection of those who defy the definition of what's considered normal. It's a great conversation that we're still having today. And some people may really consider this movie to be a bit pretentious, but I don't. I admire the guts that it has to try something different cinematically. Well, that's my watch, react, and review. I hope you liked it, and let me know what you think of the film down in the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can support the channel by doing so and hit the bell icon to be the very first to get my next review. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.